Recording in progress, and then how can I see you big? Okay, speaker. There you go. Now I can see you. Turn the lights off. Okay, sorry, Frank. Thank you. Okay, let's start. It's my great pleasure. I'm not very good at formal introductions, Frank, so you excuse me. But Frank has been an old friend of mine since I lived in Cincinnati for a while in 1991, right? And
90,
we
yeah.
yeah we worked under the same roof for a long time. And Frank became one of my best, maybe my best friend there. I even used his cabrio for a while. Remember that cabrio? Yeah, cool. And then Frank stayed at the University of Cincinnati. He's an adjunct professor. He's an emeritus professor now, and he's been doing and writing and thinking about urban design for many years. And he was the director of the Community Design Center, right? If I'm correct. Perhaps you can fill in some of the blanks there for people to get to know you more than I was able to say. But Frank is a very dear friend of mine, so you guys better like his presentation, okay? Frank, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Let me share my screen with you. But let's see. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm actually in my office here at the university. How about that? Are you seeing it?
Yep, perfect.
Is it filled the screen or too big, too little?
No, it's okay. I don't think. Yeah, I think you can fill the screen even more if you want.
Okay, for me, it's filling my screen. How's that?
Yeah, that's better, I think.
Okay. Well, I am an architect by training and an urban designer by experience, in the sense that much of my urban design approach was developed at various academic institutions, and primarily practiced under one of our close friends who has passed on, Dr. David Gosling, who wrote a book that you may not have seen much lately, but was very well known at the time in the 90s, called Concepts of Urban Design. So my orientation is very much related to the physical form of the city. I teach urban design classes that consist of planners and architects, but my orientation is about physical form. So much of what I do relates to that and what I'll show you. But the vehicle for much of my work at the University of Cincinnati, 33 years of it, revolved around connecting with the community and serving the stakeholders in our area as it pertained to community development, urbanism, and urban design. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a retrospective of various projects that go back many years, but it'll give you a flavor for the various things that I've been involved with. And undoubtedly, you have units at your university that serves this kind of function, if not individual faculty that do that as well. But let's see. How's the text look? Is it overlapping or?
A little bit. Let me take the. I
Too
think I
big?
can.
How's that?
That's okay. I just have to get. Yeah, that's good. Good.
Okay, so when I came to the university, I helped to start a center called the Center for Urban Design. And that's how Vicente and I know each other, working under David Gosling. In the mid 90s, I inherited a center called the Community Design Center, which existed in our college, the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. And that was specifically focused on working with community stakeholders and developing visions for them to use to bring into reality their goals and objectives. And out of that center, I developed a studio, which was strictly academic, although it had the same function in terms of connecting with the community and allowing students to help our stakeholders visualize and vision some of their concepts. So I'll talk about both of those things, but they're interrelated because I brought this studio concept to the university, to the college. And again, this is nothing unique. You probably have something, certainly have something at your university. And I know from reading Vicente's book that I see products that are similar. But our university, our college, despite the fact that it was design, architecture, art, and planning, didn't have any interdisciplinary studios. They had individual schools that were separated. Probably you had that experience. But you had projects in the city that called for interdisciplinary work. And functioning and administering the Community Design Center made that very apparent that no effective studio projects could work without cross-disciplinary collaboration. So the different venues that my programs have occupied have always been off campus. The one on the upper left-hand corner, the Clifton Heights field office, is in the same building that we initiated the Center for Urban Design. And that's the one that in which Vicente lived in the basement for.
That's the Smurf's house?
That's the Smurf house. It wasn't a bad basement. There was a hot tub in the backyard, right?
Yep.
As I recall.
Yep.
Wasn't
Never
so
use it.
The Community Design Center was located there, continuation of that location from the Center for Urban Design. And then we located in the heart of the city of Cincinnati, which is a small Midwestern, I won't call it a Rust Belt city, but you would recognize it as that type of city in Southern Ohio, just on the border with Kentucky. It has a very dense urban core, very small, very dense. And we located the center in this field office in a storefront down there and served that neighborhood for many years. Developed satellite offices that provided services in community-based art. Finley Market Field Office did that with fine art students, as well as planners and architects. And then in 2002, I started a program called the Niehoff Urban Studio. We were located also in the core of the city, in the first floor of this building on the lower right-hand corner. And then in 2007, the president of the university liked what we were doing well enough that she wanted us to move back up to the area near campus in Cincinnati, because she said, why should you be solving all the problems of the center city when we've got all kinds of problems around our own campus? We want you back near campus. And that's where I remain today, although the studio doesn't function in its full complement as it did in years past. The Design Center, I'll show you a few projects from that to give you a flavor of the kinds of things we have done, but the Design Centers is nothing new. Many universities have them. I think in, I don't know how many decades ago, I was looking at how many exist. I think 200 of them exist around the country. Many of them are affiliated with universities, but others are just standalone nonprofits started by professionals that want to serve the community. And their activities range from technical assistance, which I'll show you a lot of, advocacy, policy, getting the city leaders to move in a progressive direction, and of course, education in different forms. We worked in all kinds of areas, but as I said, the issues that we were trying to address were, you've heard the term wicked problems, or small wicked problems. and they really required multiple disciplines. So we employed integrated students from all the disciplines: art, fine art, industrial design, architecture, planning, and then in later years, engineering, business, real estate, and other disciplines. And all of this was directed towards real problem solving and real projects that would be implemented in some form. Here, for example, is a mobile vending stand for use by to help develop micro enterprise among vendors that didn't have the resources to set up their own storefront or even their own cart. Of course, we worked with larger institutions as well. The Cincinnati School District to develop a concept that was new at that time. This is going back to the early 2000s, that schools could function not only as specific locations for the curriculum, but also for after hours facilitation of community building events and programs. And plenty of urban design, because that was my area of expertise. We did that throughout the region, really, including the urban core of the city. But as I said, there wasn't a lot of traction for interdisciplinary work, even though there was a bit of propaganda out there for it. So even without the curriculum part of the Niehoff Studio, the Community Design Center and the Center for Urban Design before that were on a regular basis putting together and facilitating studios that were open to all the disciplines of DAP. And we did our college, and we did a lot of work in the downtown core. Here's one of them, but luckily one of our champions was a graphic design faculty member who went on to become dean, the person shown in the upper left-hand corner here, and he became very great ally in terms of developing what became the Niehoff Interdisciplinary Studio. So the concept was an off-campus classroom where not only our interdisciplinary students could meet, because they wouldn't be in any of the classrooms of their schools, which were jealously guarded by their administrators for the use of their discipline only. Instead, this group of students could come to a neutral place where they could meet together and work, as you well know, the studio process, and most importantly, a place that the community stakeholders could find, because they never want to come on campus. It's so hard to find anything on campus, and it's sometimes intimidating for them. So it was the important aspect of the Niehoff Studio that we had a place, and luckily I had a patron who was influential in the upper administration of the university. And so I was able to be provided with a space off campus, and later a space that you'll see that was actually built around the studio that was close to campus. But the objective was to have a tangible impact, and how to transfer this knowledge that you all as students develop in your work in a way that was useful to the community. So the facility that we ended up in 2007 was purpose-built for us. It's beautiful space. It was basically a gym-sized studio space located on the back of a historic building very close to campus, but it accommodates the studio, public presentations, public meetings, exhibits. We have a gallery out in front. So it was really set up to provide this nexus between the university and the functions of the studio and the community. And it functioned pretty well for many years. It's collaborative, of course. We involved all kinds of actors in the community, from leaders in nonprofit sector, as well as policymakers from the city, as you do in your studios. Most importantly, it was interdisciplinary because the faculty didn't have a way to collaborate even with our own college. Sounds simple, but it is not. And it was easy to use the city as the focus of these interdisciplinary efforts, because as we know, almost every aspect of the city presents a wicked problem. We also know that more and more our culture, our society, and our demographic shifts are pushing us into city. So that is really what the world is becoming more and more about. But the methodology was one to promote a collaborative, community-based instruction that would be off campus, that we would have external funding, which we did for many years. And then the outcome, of course, would be those that you would expect: design focused, physically design oriented, enriching student experiences in a unique way, and then contributing to the outcome in our community in one way or the other. And because the studio was connected or driven, I would say, by a outreach unit called the Community Design Center, the studio project work sometimes came out of actual technical service work that we were doing through the Community Design Center. So there's the technical service side that overlapped with the actual academic experience, as well as public education, where we were able to have public events here off campus that were focused around thematic interests of the community, not so much focused around academic interests as they were focused around timely and topical issues that were present in the community at that time. Of course, the academic component was central to what we did with the studio. And then there were a few research spin-offs, not a lot, but some. And I'll talk a bit about that. And we involved many different disciplines, but you'll see primarily we had urban planners, and interestingly enough, civil engineering was a major participant over the years. We had other centers that were peripheral to what we were doing, the economic center and the real estate center, for example, that were important in various roles, as we had studio work and technical service work. But we worked in 34 different neighborhoods, involved more than 100 community-based groups, and had lots of students and lots of faculty that participated over time. This is a bit of an outdated infographic here, but it gives you an idea. The other unique thing about the studio is that, again, not unique to the world, but unique to our college and how we functioned is, as you will probably well know, that at the end of each semester or quarter for you, I'm not sure what you have, you're done, right? And you move on to your next class, different subject, different potential collaborator, external collaborator. So what I was able to do, because I had the infrastructure of the Community Design Center, was able to organize studio work semesters over a number of years around thematic topics. So we would structure, say, 3 or 4 studios over the course of 2 years around the first one. Thematic topic 2002 was on food. Second one was on Over the Rhine, which is a geographical focus of the neighborhood we were located in, and so on. You can see here housing, transportation, health, and resilient places. So these were all thematic areas of focus over multiple years. In some cases, it really helped to bring the work at the studio together and make it a bit more impactful, and provide continuity not only for the students, even though they jumped in and out, but continuity for the faculty, and most importantly, continuity for our stakeholders and collaborators who also wanted to pursue and follow the thread of that theme through more than one studio. But the meta themes that I'm organizing the work I'm going to show you around are eating, moving, and dwelling. And dwelling meaning the Christian Norberg Scholl's definition, which is about being in a place, not just living in a house. So it may have to do with public space and other aspects. I won't talk about this too much. How to choose a theme, which was also always interesting. And then, of course, at the end of each multi-year thematic or multi-studio thematic effort, we put together various very cumbersome books, which were replaced pretty quickly by just online PDFs. And you can still find that on our website. But the first theme came to us because we had the need for a supermarket in our downtown core, which didn't exist or existed almost more like a bodega than as a real full service supermarket. And we have in our city Fortune 500 company called Kroger. I think it's the second largest food retailer in the world. And they had an interest in getting a flagship store downtown, but didn't really know how to do it because all they produce are suburban style boxes, big boxes with big parking fields around them. So they actually engage with us to allow us to help them vision new ways of seeing the supermarket. And this is, again, nothing new, but in 2002, it was considered cutting edge, which is integrating a large footprint supermarket into the fabric of a community in such a way, or the fabric of a block structure in such a way that allows other uses to occur around it. Nothing new today, no, not surprising at all. Did they do it? No, they did not do it. They reverted almost immediately to their suburban style. But that didn't keep us from continuing to critically investigate and understand big boxes and little boxes. So a lot of work went into looking at not only the food retail boxes that exist around our fringe urban area, but also even now within the urban center. So that was always a fun experience and experiment. We had interior designers working with us and graphic designers. So we had the ability to visualize some of these physical spaces in a way that you rarely get a chance to in one of your specialized studios. And we also had on the other end of things, large scale interest in understanding the demographic issues that come out of urban planners and urban geographers who participated. Sociology students, anthropology students are participated in the studio as well. That really made it a rich environment. And food was, it seems, quite out of the ordinary at that time to think about organizing design studios around food, but it really tended to bring the disciplines together for lots of reasons that seem obvious now. But at the time, it was not considered a good idea. It worked out well for us because we felt that the food topic was a way of touching so many different demographic groups, cultures that exist within ethnic groups that exist within our area, and something everybody could relate to. So we felt it could really cut across some of the barriers that existed between people in our city, which is very segregated. What we found out, you've seen a million of these community garden projects. We had a lot of fun with what is the role of food in public spaces in terms of activating space, whether it's a permanent function or whether it's a temporary temporal function. At the time, this was going back to 2003, we didn't have very many street vendors other than the hot dog stands that you would see on a regular basis. We didn't have any of the food trucks. So I won't say that the studio led to the culture of food trucks that now exists in our city, but it certainly opened the door to thinking about that. And later on, we were able to host the what became an organization of mobile food vendors so that they could negotiate with the city on where they could park, which up until then, none of the restaurants and bodegas that existed in the urban core wanted mobile food vendors anywhere near them because it takes their business. But through the advocacy efforts, the vendors as a group were able to lobby the city and get places to park. And now it's very popular. We could bring some of the studio project ideas to fruition in reality. Interior design and architecture students had a chance to work with a nonprofit job training program that was disguised as a pizza parlor. And they wanted to occupy a storefront in the core. So we work with them to both the Community Design Center as a technical service project and the studio to visualize a storefront, and then to actually build it. So students had a chance to design build primarily the finishes, but the inter-design students in the classroom actually laid out the entire storefront. We had a chance to work with a number of community groups on how to repurpose an old church campus into what we call a food campus, a vertically integrated food campus that would produce food. We actually designed and constructed, not by ourselves, but we supervised the construction of a commercial scale kitchen in which some of the food products from the campus, as well as value added products that were brought to the effort by community stakeholders like salsas and sauces and things of that nature could be produced in this commercial scale kitchen and support a micro enterprise effort that would enable some of the community residents in this very underserved part of Cincinnati to realize their potential in terms of bringing their innate skills and their product ideas to a market. Of course, it has farmers market activities and other things. This made it about 5 or 6 years, and then unfortunately they ran out of the funding, so it no longer exists. But we felt that it was something that we helped to bring to reality. And then a really fun project. Here's a 1920s school building, again in the downtown core, that had a roof structure that allowed it to have, it was originally designed to have an outdoor playground on the roof. And these were the days that tuberculosis was a major epidemic in the country, in the world. And they needed to get their students out of doors during recess, and the dense urban environment, they couldn't put them down on the street. So with the structural capacity of the roof, we were able to develop a rooftop garden for them. This is actually a teaching garden that still exists today, which is awesome, and serves this primary school in the center of Cincinnati. They actually produce a fair amount of food that's used in the cafeteria, and they have, their science classes come up and study the botanics of the garden. And then we sort of got into something we didn't think we'd ever get into, which is, I'm an architect. I don't know anything about food, right? But one thing leads to another, and the next thing you know, we understand that we really need to help the region develop some policy on how to address food issues at the larger scale. Yeah, community gardens for sure, but what about small farmers in the hinterland and how they connect their products to urban points of sale? What about sustainability issues and how we support those and advocate for those through policy at the city level, if not the county level? So we supported and promoted this idea, which existed, of course, first in California, called Food Policy Council, to develop a strategy and advocate for a comprehensive food system in our region. Led to the establishment of the Greater Cincinnati Food Policy Council, which still exists today, and they're promoting that. Ironically, the entity that was the most resistant to progressive food policy was our own university. As we helped develop this concept of the Regional Food Policy Council, we were constantly asked the question, well, what's the university doing with food? You have 40,000 students. Certainly you consume a lot of food resources and processes. What are you guys doing? And we spent a year looking at the university and developed a pretty critical report on how they function, how their food systems function within campus. And you probably have this situation on your campus. You have a vendor that you're contracted with. We have Aramar. They run all the cafeterias, and their efforts to provide or implement a sustainable process for their food acquisition and procurement and cafeteria work was not sustainable whatsoever. But they had a 10-year contract, so we couldn't really influence their work at all. So you will probably find that at your university. I don't know who your contractor is, but undoubtedly it's somebody that's resistant to change. We
Yeah, yeah, so just, yeah, that's a very good comment. I mean, university here controls all the food service. We cannot even ask for food from the outside for any event. Everything has to be through the university. And of course, it's very expensive.
mhm.
And the poor students, I think the first and second years, they are mandated to buy of like a meal plan. Even though if they don't use the meal plan, they have to buy it. It's 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 ridiculous. Anyway, thanks, Frank. Sorry, just
Not very
illustrate. I
progressive.
think we're worse than you.
Um, to understand the food policy direction, of course, you have to understand what is the food system. And it is quite complex. Like I said, I'm not a planner, I'm an architect. So with the help of grad students and faculty, we continue to burrow into understanding what is the food system. But you have to sort of start there, to understand what you've got, what's the reconnaissance. And to do that, you have to develop a model, a conceptual model of how does it work. I'm not going to get into detail here, but it was one of the fun outcomes. Another fun outcome is or things like this, how does food activate public space? And students actually had a chance to go out and implement their own guerrilla urbanism efforts. Now I'm into dwelling, so I'm going to pause there a moment and see if you all have any questions. I'm going to talk about sort of done with the food thing. I'm going to talk about dwelling and then moving.
Anybody has questions? I think we can move on, Frank. Thanks.
The dwelling, being in space, experiencing space, living space experience. You undoubtedly had participated in some guerrilla urbanism. So our students had a lot of fun doing that with lots of different groups over time. And going back to, early, late 2000s, where it just wasn't happening that much in Cincinnati, at least. So that was a lot of fun. How to activate space. Some of these were implemented, some were not. This was not implemented, but thought it was a great idea. We had competitions for students to look at how to activate spaces in a guerrilla approach and to stimulate thinking within the community and again, among policymakers about how some things could radically change our perception, understanding, and experience of even the simplest spaces in a way that was really valuable. Creative placemaking is something that I'm sure you've been involved with, and that was something our students engaged in with numbers of community partners. And again, through the technical assistance aspect of the Community Design Center, we were able to implement some of these creative placemaking concepts. Here's a playground that was a parking lot. So everything you see on the right was actually constructed, most of it with paint, of course, a few trees thrown in here and there, but trying to engage and provide, in this case, a recreational opportunity for this underserved area of the community. But you can see what it was on the lower left-hand corner there, just a parking lot as usual. In fact, Anna Ozaki did much of the design of this, which was implemented. And I haven't been down there for a couple of years, so I have to go and see what happened to it. It's still there. We had fun working with some of the larger spaces or non-spaces around the city to pitch what I thought were pretty progressive approaches, which undoubtedly you've looked at, regenerative landscapes at various locations. In this case, there's an old train station on the west side of the urban core that is underutilized in a way that it has some museum functions there, but the district around it is really pretty much of a wasteland occupied by warehouses now, for some reasons I'll talk about later. So our interest was how that district could be reconstituted to be, in this particular iteration, an institutional district of more than just one, and then how the space that knit it together could be something that went beyond just providing a landscape, but could be regenerative, productive landscape in a way that was useful. And in Cincinnati, you don't have this problem where you are, but we have a tremendous burden of rainwater and stormwater, how we address those, how we retain it, how we divert flooding in our area. And of course, food production. You are familiar with this, looking at different districts. This is actually the university district. We have a lot of parkland. Some of it is very heavily utilized. Some of it is not utilized very much at all. So we're constantly, we're engaged in a bit of a political struggle. The studio was, at a time period when the mayor was attempting to introduce a levy which would raise money to support the parks that existed in the city. So we were engaged at a political level at one point in time to actually promote a levy, which did end up failing, but was interesting to be part of that machine. And the students got a firsthand look at sausage making in the political process. Some of the proposals that came out of that involvement included this. This is the north side of campus, trying to bridge over between the campus and existing park. Thinking about how development can occur in a friendly way, because it's not about the parks, really. It's about everything that happens around it, and how what happens around it can activate the park, make it function on levels that it wasn't functioning on earlier, and provide much needed activities, much needed functions, in this case housing at the perimeters of parks that would put eyes on the park, make it safer, make it friendlier and more activated. Dwelling in the formal sense of the word, housing was a focus of a number of different cycles. And again, the technical service aspect of what we're able to do. This is a habitat house that a couple of them were constructed. Students provide the overall design, and then students were hired as co-ops to develop the design drawings, the construction documents, and then we supervise construction to the extent that we could, because it is a habitat building. And then the interesting part about this, we were able to follow up and do a forensic report. How did they actually utilize the materials as we suggested? How much sustainability was the final product? Did that represent? Lots of thought going into how different districts of the city could be developed for new housing, infill housing, in a district composition that would create sub-communities, if you will, within the urban core. The urban core remains in large part very decimated here in this Rust Belt cities. So lots of thinking about how we would approach infill and the affinity of different districts within the center. Thinking about what we do with all the vacant space that exists in a Rust Belt city. You know, we can't refill all those storefronts with retail. There just simply aren't enough consumers. There aren't enough rooftops of residents in the city to actually supply a market for all that existing storefront space. So what do you do with that? How do you construct a model that helps policymakers promote an approach to the revitalization of the city that can address some of these typological features that exist, which is, you know, multi-story building with a storefront below. And then thinking about other models of dealing with emerging demographic, I won't say emerging anymore, but at the time, emerging demographic groups, aging in place. How could our seniors stay in the neighborhoods they want to be in? How could our seniors occupy communities that were different from what we see typically for those retirement communities, continuing care communities that are constructed in urban cores that could take advantage of the amenities that exist in those dense urban cores. And the university in this case asked us to look at, could we do something near campus so that old professors like us might want to live near campus as we age and cross the street and take advantage of all the facilities that you have on campus, maybe engage with students long beyond our teaching years, to have a multi-generational experience, maybe have students live in our building and look after us to some extent, grad students or grad students with families that want to live near campus but want a multi-generational experience, and create an environment that was synergistic between the ages. So this was an interesting experience effort. In fact, they tried to market this concept to alums of the university. And they're still working on it today. In fact, they may, I've heard, although I haven't seen the plans, or I think that they're going to develop something near campus that would reflect that idea.
Cool. Hey, Frank, I have a question about what your previous theme. Have you guys thought of changing some of those storefronts into residential use?
Yes, absolutely. Dealing with that typology, right? You're down on the street level. You have a lot of glass and transparency. So it can be uncomfortable for a resident. And then you want to change the fenestration in a way that may not be reflective of the historical context, as you'd like to, close up some of that transparency and have smaller openings. So there's some resistance to actually, blocking up windows. But that is happening more and more. If it's functional to have someone actually live in the space and work out of it, whether it's a gallery, whether it's an artisanal workshop, whether it's a thrift shop that someone maintains, or a gallery. That seems to be a very welcome approach to how to deal with all these storefronts. But
yeah, I've seen some of that starting to happen in Lisbon, for instance, because a lot of the small local neighborhood shops can survive, and some of them are being transformed into residential use, particularly Airbnbs. But then you can use sanded glass, or you can use some type of blinds or whatever. But it is hard because you're changing a paradigm, right? So and it does impose on somebody's privacy at all.
Yeah, it's a struggle.
Thanks. Yeah.
We have problems with water. I'll talk more about later. So we spent a lot of time in various studios thinking about, if we were to develop housing and we need additional housing in storefronts and everywhere to accommodate workforce and those that don't have the resources to bring down the price of housing, the cost of housing. I know you have that problem out there, but we even have it here, even with all the vacant buildings we have. There are places in the city that we'd like to see additional housing that are flood zones. How can we manage that? So one issue of studio work was related to trying to develop a concept of housing that would work in these flood zones. And we had a student competition, which was fun. So students in the studio got to compete and win prizes that were sponsored by a community group. And this is one of the images, or one of the competition entries. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second before I get into moving. Any thoughts or questions about dwelling?
I do have a question about something you mentioned. You talked about how there's like a lot of vacancy in Cincinnati, and I'm guessing it's because like the Rust Belt and there's a lot of industry that moved out. I mean, I don't know that too much about Cincinnati, but that's probably what I'm guessing. And then I remember in another class we learned about a small city called like Gary's Town, Garyville, or something like that, and they were the same. They had a lot of industry that moved out, and they started like downsizing their city. So they like tried to implement measures to like concentrate people into like a downtown area that's not as spread out. But I don't know if that would work the same in a city as large as Cincinnati. So I was wondering if you do anything similar to that.
Yes, it's called the shrinking cities approach, right? Try to concentrate, gather and concentrate functions in a way that is scaled relative to, well, the markets or the needs. Absolutely. I'll show you one image of that. But that's exactly right. I mean, that's very progressive. And there's a group, actually, our partner center in Cleveland has published a number of guides on how to address shrinking cities. Cincinnati, by Ohio standards, is doing pretty great. Northern Ohio, you have places like, you've never heard of them, Toledo, Akron, old steel towns that literally lost all their industry. And they have all this infrastructure, miles of roads and things of that nature. So they do have to shrink, consolidate. And so that is, yeah, absolutely an approach that we should all be aware of.
I saw a presentation by a woman that worked for the Detroit Planning Department, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and she was showing this interesting project. Basically, there's so many vacant lots, right, in the middle of those old mansions that are partly derelict. So they have this interesting program that turns all those vacant lots into community gardens, and they somehow energize the community around participatory projects to kind of take care of those lots and produce
Mm-hmm.
food for themselves. Um, but that might be difficult in Cincinnati, where the land value is very different. But
What is very different? There are places, though, that food can be cultivated and at scale. I mean, in Detroit, you could have 80 acres.
yep, yep.
Um,
I mean, in terms of food, Michael Sorkin's think tank group. I don't. Michael Sorkin is the guy. You introduced me to Michael Sorkin.
yeah, yeah.
His research group had a very interesting research project that basically they proved that if in New York you can cultivate all those open spaces and parks, it basically feeds the whole city. Um,
Absolutely. And here you're having it out there, I'm sure too, but now we're getting a lot of warehouses that are being converted, and hydroponic farming is happening in those here. So
yep.
that's happening as well. Okay, moving is huge. As dealing with any urban form, moving about the structures of the city so many different ways. The roadways, of course, the corridors, the movement infrastructure, whether it's rail or otherwise. Really structures our physical form, right? It's the framework for everything. So here's this is a what I'll call a Lynchian image of this city, our city, at a regional scale. The very the outer circle there is the Beltway. The geometry isn't exactly like this, but it'll give you an idea. We basically have radiating from the core the arterials and some highways. So Cincinnati is very much of a radial city, and it's made up of an archipelago, if you will, of different hills and communities that exist on those hills around this, what we call the basin of the urban center. And it doesn't appear very strong there, but there's the river, which is one of our key identity elements, although you don't see it much if you actually occupy Cincinnati. Lots of time exploring this issue of bus rapid transit, which comes from some little town in Brazil. I've forgotten the name of it, but it always had great renown among design circles, planning circles, but not very well known in the U.S. at all. And this is going back, into the 2000s, so people weren't talking about it much. There were a handful of cities that were attempting to implement it and some that actually did implement it, but it was far from anybody's interest in Cincinnati. So we introduced this concept of BRT, worked with our metro agency, explored different approaches, and many of those were related to, of course, complete streets. It's got to be part of that equation. What happens at the hubs and what kind of development can occur around them, transit-oriented development, which you're very familiar with. But in Cincinnati, it's got a bit of a different flavor because we're really trying to infill these more urban central locations than we are trying to develop new TOD at the periphery, and how BRT, bus rapid transit, can work with these infill transit-oriented development clusters. And bikeways, which again, I mean, like it's everywhere now, right? But go back, it wasn't happening much. I mean, there was rails to trails, which we had some of that in the periphery of our city, but nothing in the urban core really that were converting rails to trails or any other separated bikeways. So we had a group that approached us that was interested in helping them to visualize what this thing would look like on an abandoned railway right through the heart of the city. So we had a lot of fun working with them. And this is one of the few projects that actually got implemented in the way that it was envisioned. Although this is a detail section of one area of that corridor. There was a bit of a kerfuffle because the bike people, they just wanted to do a bike. The bike path didn't have to occupy a lot of space. It's over here on the far left-hand corner. But the Regional Transit Authority were very concerned that they would lose the ability to maintain that rail access for a future light rail system. By future, I mean like 50 years from now in Cincinnati time. So there was quite a battle between the bike people and the light rail people. So we got ourselves right into the middle of that, and that was no fun at all. But in the end, the bike people won, and the city bought the remainder of the right-of-way, that rail right-of-way, and now there's a really nice separated trail that, like I say, goes right through the center of, not right through the middle of the downtown area, but in the streetcar suburbs, which would be the next layer out from the center of the city. And, we had fun exposing them to ideas of the green infrastructure that could occur along the bikeway, that would handle some of what is our stormwater retention issue that we have in this area, as well as hard infrastructure as well that could exist to complement those urban areas that are close to town or close to the center. And then multimodal hubs, how could we expose our partners to the benefit of multimodal hubs that could occur both along this bikeway, future LRT routes, BRT routes, and what kind of functions could occur there that would pull these all together into hubs, which would be the heart of a TOD, an infill TOD in various locations of the city. Here's another example that's sort of at the periphery of the city. None of these got implemented, but they will hopefully expose people to the ideas of thinking about how these hubs could occur and how TOT could occur. And coming back to the question that we had earlier, shrinking cities, here is a BRT and a bikeway path that is not the same one that I showed you earlier, but a different one along one of the major corridors. and thinking about how they did implement a streetcar in Cincinnati, but it's really just in the downtown core. Thinking about how a streetcar could be implemented that would reach further out into the what actually used to be streetcar suburbs or the near-in suburbs. This would be, to you, this would be very dense neighborhoods. And how the areas in between those dense nodes then could be preserved for other uses, whether it were natural uses or whether it was agriculture. So we did spend some time looking at that, and there's plenty of underutilized land, even within the city boundaries, that could be repurposed in a way that could consolidate some of these uses, make more dense these nodes. You probably know that without density, mass transit is very difficult to sustain. So Cincinnati lacks the necessary density along the various possible routes to really support mass transit, whether it's light rail transit or whether it's bus rapid transit. So one of the goals of this exercise was to illustrate how you could promote that density by shrinking and consolidating, as you discussed in the previous question. I'm going to, this last project is about typomorphology, which I know your professor loves so much. And I've already gone an hour, and I could of course go on a whole nother hour, but I have a project that I can talk more about this project with the typomorphological study and proposal for the region. But I'll just stop there now and see what you want to do.
I would love if you can talk about the typomorphological project, because that is, interestingly enough, every time I teach typomorphology in urban design, I try to do that. That's the dimension that I teach that it's most difficult for the students to gather. I don't know why that is the case. Perhaps because most of them don't have an architectural background. But at the same time, I think it's one of the most important for planners. So up to you.
Okay, and I don't. How many people are still awake in the class there?
Everybody's awake.
I'm doing something that is one of the worst practices in education, which is lecturing at you. You know, the more fun structure for teaching and learning is interactive, right? And what's happening now is not really an interactive process, but it's what we've got. So I'll continue.
That's the nature of Zoom, Frank. We can't.
It is the nature of Zoom. What I have done in past presentations is ask people to vote on what they wanted to hear about. In this case, it's not a democracy in this particular situation, but you're going to correct me on typomorphology. But you and I both have an affinity because, as you say, we're architects. We look at things from a physical point of view. But that's not to say that those non-physical things are not generative of physical form. They certainly are. And one of the projects that I'll show you here, which actually was a research project that came to us through a collaboration between Brazilian faculty, French faculty, and American faculty. A French group got a grant to compare the urban form and movement between Curitiba, Bordeaux, France, and Cincinnati.
Wow.
Don't ask me why. Okay, I'll tell you why Cincinnati. It was in there is because they knew about the grant and they got the grant. And I was part of the research team. But we had three different situations. We had Bordeaux, we had Curitiba, which everybody should know about that. There can't be anybody in class that doesn't know about Curitiba. Am I right?
Yeah, well, there was a session on that, so They should know.
There's Curitiba, which is the beauty, right? It's got all of the transit that you would ever want. It's the most perfect urban form and movement system that could exist. It's state of the art, even today. So Curitiba had to be one of the comparative studies. Cincinnati has nothing. We have no transit other than surface buses to speak of, which don't operate very well at all. We got a little bit more now. So we're the control, right? The American control at the other end. And then you had Bordeaux, which had just implemented a new streetcar system in a historic city. So all three cities, well, Curitiba is a bit more modern, but so we were comparing, these three situations and three cultures, which was quite fascinating. And I can't get into, we're not going to have time to get into the whole research study, but I'm just going to talk about the typomorphological study of the Cincinnati and the movement systems that exist. And it relates to something you have to understand before we get there. This is the final product, but I'm going to go backwards here. Here's our metropolitan MSA, metropolitan statistical area, our urbanized area. And it stretches quite a far way north and south across the river, which you see in light blue, into Kentucky, a different state, and also west into Indiana, different state. It's quite a large area. We're about 2 million, somewhere in there. Nothing by California standards, but we're a very flat city. We're very spread out. Our metropolitan area is very spread out. And here's the landform, if you will, the topographic landform. The city of Cincinnati is right down here in this little mouth here, this little pale little mouth. Can you see my cursor there?
Yep.
And you have a valley here and a valley here, and then you have some highland plateaus, not highland by California standards, talking like 700 feet or something. And highlands in Kentucky as well. So what do you think is the most important single elements that shape the urban form of Cincinnati and its metro? I'll ask your class. Throw out anything.
The mountains, because they're the environmental determinants.
Yeah, it's weird when they speak it away from this mic here, but most of them said the mountains, right?
Oh yeah, they're the environmental determinants.
Yeah.
So they're gonna build, basically they're gonna build on the edge of the mountains.
Yeah, they think that
not on top.
the mountains will be the main environmental determinant.
So basically topo.
Topo, yeah.
Anybody else?
The river.
The
Yeah.
river,
Yep.
the valleys, right?
The valleys, topo. Yeah. And the river is central to not just the identity, but the functionality of the city of Cincinnati as a market, right? We were one of the westernmost, we were a frontier town going way back. And, the river allowed us to connect to markets and bring the product of our area, our agrarian product, to other markets. Well, the river, this is my rationale, but water has driven and continues to drive the morphology of the region. It really does. And that's no surprise. Maybe for you, it's lack of water, but for us, it's an abundance of water, and not just today, but going back. So this is an early 90s flooding situation. Looks different. The city looks a bit different now, but the modern core is here. Well, it's a historic core, but you see modern buildings. And the flooding inundates our riverfront area. The bank of the river is all the way out here, and you can see water coming all the way in, approaching the downtown grid. In 1937, it was even worse. This flood, the Great Flood, occupied water occupied all this area up into this valley, and as a result, much of this very dense neighborhood here ended up being removed because it was, even before the flooding had been was considered to be in need of remediation. But after the flooding, it was basically abandoned. And the center, or here's a comparison of 1950 Cincinnati or 1940 Cincinnati and today, relatively today. The area of flooding that I just showed you was in this sort of western portion here. And you can see what it looked like at that time. Very dense with, 4 or 5 story mixed use buildings, storefronts on the lower level, apartments above. And today, occupied now, was cleared out, completely occupied by warehouse distribution facilities, not so much manufacturing. And then, of course, the highway in the 50s was constructed right through there, which decimated that entire urban fabric. The other form of water, which is very influential for the morphology of our urban settlements, was in the form of frozen water. And believe it or not, the glaciers extended down to just the river where Kentucky is, and occupied all of Cincinnati and caused all kinds of geological interesting little features, including an ice dam. The original river, what would have been the Ohio River, actually ran north up through Indiana. Today it runs here, this lighter line. But the ice dam created by the glacier caused the redirection of the river into what we have today, more or less. And zooming in now to our this is our county, and then the city of Cincinnati here in the hatched. Even locally, the rivers have changed course over time, and I'm going back a few million years here. But if there are geologists here, I apologize in advance. You'll know way more about this than me. But our rivers were redirected. Here's the current river runs here. But at that stage, a river was running north of the core of downtown. And this is a bit further out, but the city of Cincinnati is here. The current river runs here, this dark stripe there. And what I showed you before, river actually ran north of the downtown core. And this is relevant to the morphology. You'll find out in a minute. But the geology was sedimental. It was basically bottom of an ocean. That's where we were, as you were too. But you got tossed up there in a violent way later on. Well, our area stayed flat, and the upper diagram here shows you the kind of forms that existed at that time. There's a little bit of heaving, not a whole lot. This is actually called the Cincinnati Arch. But when the glaciers came through, they just cut that off. And then with the melting of the glaciers and the deposits, different topographic forms were created that we don't refer them as mountains here, they're hills, but whatever small changes in elevation that occurred from erosion and the action of the glaciers. And this is what we have today. As the glaciers cut, the plain, the ocean bed, and then they receded, they deposited things. And it's relevant because, our development occurs on the stability of what it finds underneath. And so this is what you see in our area. You see these striations or layers of the sedimentary rock, clay, and other materials. And what happens is the water, it's called cope. The water would fall on the upper levels, the plateau, and then percolate down into the ground and then find its way horizontally when it hits these layers of harder material and moves horizontally and comes out these cuts or whatever the escarpments are that were eroded or cut by the glaciers earlier. And each layer is separated by clay. So when that clay gets wet, it becomes slippery and it starts to slide. So that stone will just slide out, and whatever's on top of it will slide with it. So they say, and I'll have to find my sources for this, that we were second to California in the terms of damage created by earth movement, but it's very slow movement. What you're looking at here is from the 1925 city plan that was developed, that shows a development that occurred in these areas of the hillsides, of which we have many, and it would just fall down and slip out. And you remember that these are not built out of frame, these are built out of stacked bricks, so it just all fell down. So as a result, people got wise. And here, I'm sorry, this is very blurry, but this is a 19th century image showing the escarpments that were left behind by the action of the glaciers and the erosion that occurred from moving water over time. But you see the many escarpments that exist. None of those could be developed on, really, especially not with 19th century technology. Today, it's easier and that is occurring, but you start to see, traces of these escarpments where nothing could be built. And the upside of that was that it all became parkland, or much of it became parkland, which is great. So now we have this little sort of bearded hillsides all around Cincinnati, which retain much of our green character as you look at the city from above or in vistas. And you see here, for example, this is following the green. This is a plan from 1907, following the edges of some of these hillsides, which was very valuable, that in the sense that it was recognized even then as an asset that was accidental in a sense, but a product of the geology. Here's another example of the those lines of undevelopable area which became green space. Conversely, flat areas were the only areas left over to develop on with that technology. So we had the core here, which was mixed use, highly residential, of course, very constrained by the hillside, which is, this is the upper plateau, the lighter area, very constrained by the hillside. But a valley that offered opportunities for industrial development. Remember, this was the previous course of that river, which was redirected to today's pathway, which is down here. So the presence of that previous river created that lower plain, the valley, that could be developed with larger footprints, industrial uses and things of that nature. Unfortunately, it was low enough that it could still flood. So much of that could really only be used for those types of uses and not residential. The residential had to sort of cluster up here on this little perch, about, 30 feet above the valley floor, but below the plateau that exists where the university, because the transportation technology wouldn't support daily movement of goods up and down from that hillside in the 19th century or the early 19th century. So people refer to Cincinnati as the city of hills, city of 7 hills, but it's really a city of valleys. And it's a bit of an archipelago. The valleys, the neighborhoods are broken up because of these valleys and these geological, the topography, of course, that was generated because of the geological actions I described. So our riverfront, we developed a different way of addressing our riverfront. You've seen it before, but I'll show it here in detail. We had to let the water pass, right? We couldn't just bottle up the water that was trying to get out of its banks. We had to figure out how to develop the riverfront at the same time we let the water pass. So they developed, this is what it looks like more or less today. This is actually a plan, but you showed 2 stadium here. and other mixed-use development, including institutional here, which would normally be in the path of the flood. So what they did was develop a flood wall here that was further back at the edge of that area that was flooded that you saw in the 90s image. And that is essentially our flood wall. And above that are developed platforms. Underneath the street grid that exists, this is, again, the area of flooding. It's all parking under there. So you have multiple levels of parking decks, and the water can actually flow through those decks. So if we have another inundation, the water will flow through and get back out. But essentially, we've created a platform above that floodable area on which we constructed this mixed-use district called the Banks District. It's basically where the sports bars are, the stadium, and there's some residential there and a couple of office buildings. So we're looking, everything here is a giant platform above that floodable area. So that's one way that we've addressed, the forces of water in the downtown core. We also have a tremendous problem with combined sewers, meaning that the stormwater and the gray and black water are mixed. Because our system was constructed in the 19th century, there was no concern with separating the two. I'm sure in California it's separated. So we're in the process of trying to get them separated. But what happens when we have a major storm event is the sewers get overloaded, and they can't treat all the everything that's coming into the treatment plant, so they just have to let it out into the river. So the EPA, US EPA, has a consent decree against the city to remediate the issue. And what we're starting to see in the urban core, the urban forms that are emerging now, are dealing with this issue of managing rainwater, not dealing with just the river, but managing water that's coming down from the plateaus above. Here's an example. Oh, by the way, this is a little valley on the west side of the urban core, and you can see here the hillside. The green areas can't really be developed in, and they haven't been developed. You get development on the plateaus above and in the valley below, but not in between. So here's a project of the Metropolitan Sewer District, not ours. This is an example of the morphology, how it's changed. And we're getting different, morphological forms that are addressing some of these water issues. And this is green infrastructure, nothing new in terms of concept, but we're finding that in this case, they took an entire valley neighborhood and they removed the majority of the structures in the center of that neighborhood. Now you can imagine removing all the stores that existed in your neighborhood center and building a green infrastructure, a strip of park that would capture and retain the stormwater that's running down from these hills. There's a lot of controversy about the removal.
How are they going to be doing that? Eminent domain?
Yes, and it's complete. And I'm sorry I don't have any on-the-ground photos, but it is complete now. So that's a bit of a change in the morphological manifestation of addressing some of these major environmental problems that you start seeing large-scale morphological changes in the city, both the riverfront you saw and then these green infrastructure projects that are happening around in various locations. Skip this stuff. So I mentioned Cincinnati is a regional city. We spent a lot of time in this research project looking at comparing the cities and looking at every aspect, of course, all the roadway systems between all the three cities. So we had this comparative analysis of all three cities at multiple scales, national and very local. All the different infrastructure, whether it was bike or even pedestrian, demographics, all the stuff that planners look at, right? But my particular charge was to understand the morphology of what was happening in our MSA or urbanized area. So we had a lot of fun with trying to understand what was happening. It seems so obvious, but when you really start to drill down, we discovered some interesting things. Various densities occur, and this is modeled here in this 3D image. The darker or the highest density, which are still very low by international standards and even national standards. And the lightest gray, of course, is basically suburban sprawl. And that's basically how our region stacks up. You can see the ring road here just to get an idea of scale. Here's the downtown, but I'm going to skip over this really fast. This is sort of fun, not something that architects get into that much, but we wanted to look at the transect of various corridors that exist in the city. So we started to pick out we sampled different areas of the metro to see what they look like and did a basic transect analysis, which is fun. Based on different characteristics that occur even within each sample. The roadway configurations and the built form configurations, and trying to abstract those in a way that would help us conceptualize them a little bit more. But then getting into, this is going to lead nowhere, by the way, but I just want to show it to you for fun. Getting into some quantitative analysis of those samples, which was fun, but sort of tricky. We started to look at understanding, different aspects of the built form and laying them out graphically to understand and try to compare them graphically to see if we could see anything. What would it help us understand things? So we looked at these, dozens of samples, different types of uses, whether they were primarily residential, mixed use, or primarily industrial, and trying to see what we could understand relating these quantitative factors. And it was really fun graphically, but in the end, we didn't come to a conclusion, but I'm going to run this through ChatGPT and see if AI can draw some connections and some conclusions about the comparison of the the quantitative typological aspects that exist in these different samples. But what it did lead us to think about, understanding the topography of the area and thinking about the built form and the street network, and starting to lay these out at the metro scale and blurring them so that we could start to see enclaves. And what we started to pull out of this was that the district, even the metropolitan area, even though there's certain sameness to what we're seeing, that there are very specific enclaves that exist, and it's primarily structured around street networks that you can see here clearly. The street network clusters constitute very clear enclaves, if you will, and here they're represented more graphically so you can understand them. So we sort of understand the metro area now in its morphological form as three different bands of clusters of enclaves. The constellation of enclaves, if you will. We have the inner, we have the center core, historical core. We have the streetcar suburbs or first suburbs, if you will, and then we have the outer core, which is the low density suburban areas. But they are all enclaves, and they're all fragmented in this way, which is very unfortunate and makes it very difficult for transportation. But here are the high density, low density, and medium density. You can see you're only getting, at the highest density, you're getting just 9,000 persons per square mile, still very low. And here's that 3D rendering. So if we just look at the high density and the high density and medium density, that's what it looks like. And we sort of find what are these interesting little stragglers out here, and what are they doing out there? And then the low density, it's a mat, right? Just occurs across the entire region. This is all suburban sprawl, and it's held together with the highways. So we started to look at the supporting uses as well to understand those and how it interrelated to the form, and looked at the major employment areas. We do luckily have lots of employment in the center city. but we also have tons of employment in the outer area. And these are manufacturing distribution areas. These are in the suburbs. But of the high density, you see these little stragglers out there. What were they doing? So we looked at what related to those, all the elements and the stragglers as well. And then we looked at the topo again to figure out how it all related to the topo. And this is a bit more of an abstraction to help you see what the high density and medium density enclaves, as well as the supporting uses that you see in purple, industrial, red, retail, how it all lays out in terms of the topo. And it's obvious. The more dense development wants to be in the flatter locations. It doesn't want to be in the upper locations. So much of that is a product of the availability of flat land, but also the availability of transportation in the 19th century, which was the railways. Seems obvious, right? So if this is graphical analysis to help us understand, well, look, we've got a state highway here that could accommodate bus rapid transit. We have lots of rail lines that could accommodate rail transit. And all this ties together these stragglers of high density, which are underutilized for housing, to the urban core and beyond. We also looked at the employment that exists, the employment opportunities, and found out that a great bulk of employment opportunities, jobs actually exist in this corridor. So that was our pitch, that we could create this new linear system that heads essentially there, but it's latent, been abandoned, to pull together the entire region along this system. But what do we do about the low density, which is all this stuff, and its employment capacity and retail capacity? Well, we let it be there. We let it continue to exist. And we say, well, that exists with its own system of movement, which is primarily roadways, and just stays the way it is. You want to live there, you get to live in the polycentric city, enjoy that life, suburban sprawl and lots of land. You still connect to the urban core, and that's great. We're not going to fight it. But for those who want to be in a dense urban environment and rely less on automobiles and still have a connection to the urban center, they can live a different life, which is along this urban corridor. So that ended up being our pitch for the transportation opportunities that exist within the historic morphology of the region. No one's taking us up on it so far.
Have you guys thought of a network a little bit like Curitiba, in which you have feeder lines from the low density neighborhoods to this rapid bus rapid transit or rail or whatever transit spines, right?
Like the last mile?
Yeah, like park to ride or something like that. Or
so, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you go this corridor we're showing here, I mean, this is looking at about a mile and a half, which is a long way to walk. You're not walking that far, but you could get a half last mile transportation, whether it's bikes, whether it's shuttles, vans, of course surface buses, that would bring people to the line. We don't have the ability like Curitiba to create a geometrically perfect line one way or the other, because we got this topo to deal with. And honestly, the right-of-ways aren't there anymore. But right-of-ways remain here. Those rail line right-of-ways exist. Of course, much of it is freight, so we'd have to fight the freight companies to get passenger in there. But it exists.
Yeah, what's interesting about the city morphology is that it could not develop along the river, right? Because there were the valley along the river was not wide enough for the city to grow. So it went like perpendicular to the river.
That's
Which,
exactly right. It was pinched. It was
yeah,
pinched here. Here you have the ability to spread out, but even these don't look, they look like low-lying areas, but they're actually high enough to be difficult to develop on. But yeah, you're sort of pinched, but you do have that mouth, which is sort of nice. Go back to that. Yeah, so it was, yeah. So you have this mouth here, and that's where everything developed. But yeah, you're pinched going in either direction. And we never really understood why this didn't get developed. It is very undeveloped in that area. And we just suspect that, that's where the trade node occurred right at, this valley. And that's where development sort of radiated from. So anyway, it all comes back to the nature of the landform. So the topo is right, but the topo is generated by the water, which you still struggle with, and new urban forms are emerging with our continued struggle to deal with water. But other forms are available that are progressive forms that allow us to take advantage of the legacy we've been left behind because of the water.
mhm. Okay, thank you. We got 15 minutes, Frank. Can you close up? So maybe we have some questions, or sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm just the timekeeper here.
I think I've thrown enough at the wall here. Let's see what sticks.
Okay. So, anybody, please address your questions. Douglas, you always have questions. I know you are dying to ask questions. So if you do have questions, please come here or get somebody's computers and do it. Annika, questions? Our transportation man, Emilio. Yeah. So here you have one. Thank you.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Hi.
I'm Annika. So I have never been to Ohio or Cincinnati, and I'm looking at your maps, and I see where Cincinnati is, right? But if you're planning this whole regional transportation and development plan, is that all the city of Cincinnati, or would you have to, is it the metropolitan area, and there would have to be a lot of coordination between other cities to make something like that happen?
Yeah, we it represents multiple jurisdictions. I think 100.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
just 100? Come on.
Wow.
I mean, we have townships, of course, we have cities, other cities, legit cities to the north, Middletown, up here, up at the far end of here, we have Hamilton, Middletown. Those are legit cities. Probably how big is SLO?
50,000.
Oh yeah, they're bigger than SLO up here. A couple of them, and then just out of the picture here is Dayton, which is I don't know. That's probably 200,000. So yeah, we don't have MetroGov. I don't think we've spent a lot of time even contemplating MetroGov because it's so fragmented in terms of the jurisdictions. Now we do have something called OKI, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments, and they constituted by representatives from many of these municipalities or jurisdictions. And they make recommendations on the federal fund, where the federal funding goes, primarily for highways. Or let's just say they have directed the funding to highways and not towards transit anytime recently. We're getting a little trickle here and there. for a couple of transit related things, but that's the best that we've got in terms of regional collaboration, policy and governance. And honestly, I don't think we're going to get much more in my lifetime. But the feds do have the golden rule. They do have the ability to apply leverage by restricting funding to regional solutions, and that would be one way of nudging some of our leaders into collaborating together. But we struggle. The metro, the transit authority here does cross city lines, gets into county lines, and historically it had faced the same headwinds that many other American cities have faced, which is basically post World War II suburban development, and the residents in those areas did not welcome movement from those who lived in the city, the center city, to outer areas. Today we have a spatial mismatch. We have, people living in areas, the urban core, and job opportunities primarily outside of the urban core. So the suburban interests are very concerned about further enabling the bus system, surface bus, to enable what I'll call inner city residents to reach those jobs that are at the periphery, at the ring road. So it's a big struggle. It's a big cultural struggle. In Cincinnati, those that ride the bus, there's very, very clear visceral you'll get a visceral understanding of the divisions when you ride a bus in Cincinnati, because most of the people riding the bus are of one demographic and not the other. And nearly everybody can have a car. It's easy to get a car. Gas around here is cheap, and there's lots of roadways, and they just continue expanding the highways, which of course, as you know, the capacity gets filled up immediately. So it's a pretty pessimistic, horizon for us, but we see it elsewhere, and we always wonder why we can't get there.
Thanks, Frank.
Hello, Frank. I'm Douglas. Thanks so much for your presentation.
All right, thanks.
So, a couple of questions. The first would be, what is the best resource that you found to understand urban morphology? You've got another fan of morphology here. So is there a particular book or a website that you'd recommend? Just the first question.
There's this really cool book that I picked up recently. Guy Vicente Del Rio.
I have it.
He's got a chapter right in here. Do you have it?
I do.
There's a chapter right in there on typomorphology. I come from, I believe we're from the same family of heroes, right? Going back to Gosling. And so we come from that school. I would also recommend if they can get a hold of Gosling's book, because he's very much oriented towards typology.
I think Brenda Shear's book that she published through the APA is very good too.
Yeah, she takes it to the extreme. And you remember Kirill Staniloff?
Yes.
He collaborated with her, but he works at a lab in London, and they, slice and dice cities to understand the morphology. So he might be a fun one to look at. His last name is Stanilov. Kirill Staniloff. But yeah, all the resources that I draw on to think about morphology are the ones that your professor already knows.
Okay, thanks so much. And the second question is kind of broad, but if you were going to be developing a new town or a new city, thinking in the context of urban morphology and topography, what are the first questions that you'd ask yourself?
Newtown.
Yes.
I would come back to a question that was asked earlier. Is there compression that could occur elsewhere that would obviate the need for a Newtown? It's hard to think, especially in I don't know about you, but we had the most fertile soil in maybe the world, this valley, because of the water, the glaciers, and that action over time. And every acre we give up is an acre of lost, fertility. And so I don't think that I'd be hard pressed to justify greenfield development in our area. But I would constantly be pushing towards compression of, whatever low density we had in our region to consolidate existing uses and also new uses into those areas. We're famous, you have it out there, right? But we're famous for creating interchanges so that greenfield development can occur. And we're getting now these crazy situations where there's interchange and development around it that's trying to be a simulacrum of urban experience. So they've actually created multi-story buildings around a street. And so people in the periphery can have a, pseudo urban experience. They don't have to come into the urban center. But yes, so it's a simplistic answer. It's not realistic from a policy point of view, but I would resist greenfield development wherever I could.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I appreciate your answer.
Frank, that was a loaded question, because Douglas is doing his master's project is a new town in Santa Maria, which is a town close by, and they're the super example of leapfrog development and spread out development in agricultural fields. But one of the only things that actually acts strongly against new development here in California, and even in San Luis Obispo County, is the lack of water. The developer has to prove there's water to develop, and as you know, any new well is very controlled, and it's not easy to do that. Maybe you guys can export some water to us, and then
it's
California
insane
might be
how
happy again.
how different our situations are. I mean, we can't get rid of it. You can't get
Well,
enough.
maybe we can do. We can. You have a deal. So bring us water, and we'll send you some dry weather.
Now, Calthorpe has some plans to run, linear development up along the highways, doesn't he?
No. Well, there is some forceful legislation from the state level to facilitate TODs and basically, in a way, mandate the cities to kind of open their legs to development close to transit, which is, I mean, and also housing. I mean, housing is basically low-income housing, affordable housing is strongly pushed by the state government, and it's causing causing other problems, I think, because it's like one size fits all, right? So if a developer comes to San Luis Obispo and says, "Hey, I want to do something affordable here downtown," the city can't do anything about it. Cannot impose the land use regulations because the state overimposes their own approach to that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
But there's a great chapter, design model for strategic growth in San Luis Obispo County chapter.
Yep. That was an interesting research project, but it was basically an illustration of what if the developers follow the design thought behind the idea of strategic growth. which was coined because a lot of people here did not support smart growth, because of course smart growth is a plot from the left, right? So they had to come up with another name, which is strategic growth for the conservatives. Not in my
Neoliberals.
backyard, yeah, accepted. And then to show how that could happen design-wise, they hired us to do that little study. That was the idea, but there's no it's not mandated. It's just it's see how it can be done, right?
Well, let me put you on the hot seat for just a minute. Based on my, this is my first reading of several chapters here. You individually as a scholar seem to be on the fence about the value of new urbanist morphological benefits and the opposing recognition that these aren't authentic places, that these are simulacrum of things that aren't real.
Yeah, that's a good way to ask it. I don't think I'm on the fence. What I'm very negative about any fashion, in a way, and I think that the way a lot of neo-urbanist theory and concepts are applied is very formulaic. I don't think that planners who come up with neo-urbanist plans necessarily study the local type of morphology or the local history to come up with the local types, right? They just impose something that they apply everywhere. Or for instance, the idea that design can produce, architectural design can produce community automatically, it's very naive. Or the hate that new urbanists have for garages and the love for alleys, right? And I always tell my students, well, alleys, historically, you can defend alleyways, but I think that alleyways take life from the street to the middle of the block. They duplicate infrastructural costs. They don't save land, right? There are a lot of other problems too. So I think that you got to always look at both sides. Maybe that's standing on the fence, right? To look at both sides of the fence and then you decide where to go in a way. Or cul-de-sacs. I love cul-de-sacs. I have been living cul-de-sacs for like 60 years. Yeah. And if you don't produce this long cul-de-sacs and nobody knows where they go, cul-de-sac can be really nice, very defensible, by the way.
Very defensible. And that's the lesson of the Middle Eastern urban development, right?
Yeah.
How to confuse people.
No, defensible in the sense that if you make them short and you protect, kids can play on the street, they can meet each other much more easy, and you live in a place that's more peaceful. Cars don't drive by all the time. That's my view of cul-de-sacs. I love cul-de-sacs. Short cul-de-sacs. Okay, does anybody else has a question? Okay.
You've been very patient.
Frank.
Thank you.
Well, no, thank you, Frank. It was a great presentation. It's very nice to see that a university design center that really works. We don't have that here. We do a lot of the community work through the studios, but we don't have a center like that. I wish we could have that.
Well, it doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't?
No.
Oops, you left.
That's the
It
thing.
extinguished.
You need someone to champion it, someone to go out and raise the money for it, and the advocate. And without that, everybody's too busy. You know, mainline faculty don't have time.
Okay, okay. So do you want to ask a question? So come here, yeah, because everybody, I mean, everybody dropped out. Emilio, our transportation guy, has a question.
Not transportation related.
It's not transportation related. So
Yes. Quick question, when you're talking about the community design center, you kept mentioning a lot the technical assistance, and I could kind of wrap my head around the policy and community engagement work you guys did, but when you say technical assistance, what exactly does that entail?
Oh, doing the architectural drawings, you know, the construction drawings, getting the permit, actually supervising construction.
Okay, so the process.
Yeah, or we actually built things, you know, design build. We were actually building spaces and building, um, you know, instruments, or in the case of the vending cart, actually building the vending cart. So what I mean is the actual applied work that students for hire, everybody, once we finish the studio project and we want to continue it into something that would actually get built, then the students would get paid to do that work.
And you said a lot of times this was a multi-year thing, so when students went on to graduate, does that mean the next class of students went ahead and took on that same project?
That was always tricky, wasn't it? Because you had a group that had made decisions. You have a new group coming in saying, why are they doing this? Doesn't make any sense. You know, we want to start over again. So that was to be avoided wherever possible because of the conflict that would arise. But yes, the dynamics were always rich in terms of how that worked. But yes, that's one of the downsides of the semester process. But I could also hire students to be there, you know, over a multi-semester period as well as co-ops and things.
do you call the plans and urban design projects as technical assistance also, or just architectural stuff?
Well, I mean, if we got out, if we finished the studio and then we had to continue on and create a document and, you know, distill the best practices or come up with, you know, something that would be printed documentation, because you can't really do that in a studio effectively unless you got grad students. Yeah, we'd have to continue on. I guess I would call that technical, although we weren't really creating the content. Content had been created in the studio. We're trying to package it. And promote it.
Okay.
So yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I've enjoyed this so much, what I've done here. I don't think I could continue at the energy level that needs to be continued at, but I mean, I love this job. I really did.
But Frank, now that you're an emeritus professor and you have all this time in your hands, you could fulfill your promise and write as an article, right, for our journal. Or you should write your own book.
I've got 4 chapters written, and or 5 written, and you were on the list to be a reader. You don't know it, but you're on the list. My editor's got it right now, and she's giving me a hard time. But she said, "Well, find an expert that can read this, and you're the one."
Okay. Okay.
But I'm not a scholar. I warn you in advance.
Yeah,
you know that.
No. Okay, but yeah, if you pay me a beer, I'll give you a very good review. Okay. Anyway, thanks, Frank. Do you mind if I put the presentation online?
No, I don't. I mean, recognize that will be very you know, there's a number of things there that need correction, plenty of typos and other things. So if you do a disclaimer on the accuracy of that, and
I'll do that.
If anybody wants corrections, you know, put my email up there so they can reach out to me and say, what does this mean? So I can clarify before they run out and use it.
I'll do that. But you're photogenic enough to be very successful on our YouTube channel here. No, I'm kidding. It's only in the class.
Oh
only
no!
In the class. Hey man, you owe me a visit. Yeah.
I do, and you'll get that visit.
Okay. I hope it's sooner than later. Sooner than later. don't wait for all the floods and all the stuff from climate zone to reach us here, because we might actually every day I wake up in my house and I basically expect to open the door and find out I'm at the waterfront, right? But no, it's not yet.
Well, if you remain there, if you survive, I'll be visiting you.
Okay, do that. Let's keep in touch, Frank. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the invite.
Yep. Good night.